Frisian is spoken in three areas: a province in the Netherlands, a pocket in Germany, and an area on the border with Denmark. But it's a bit unfair to encompass all these areas as just Frisian, since they have many historical differences that sever them from each other. Let's take East Frisian for example. The only East Frisian dialect that still exists is Seelterfriesk, also called Seeltersk, with the amount of native speakers being around 2,000, which is a number even lower Sorbian hasn't reached yet. I don't think I can properly explain to you just how small Seelterfriesk is. If everyone who spoke the language were to spontaneously explode, they would only make up about 1.8% of global deaths in a single day. They are a linguistic minority in the municipality they reside in and even in the towns they live in. So my main question for Seeltersk is, how does such a small language survive? And in which towns do the most East Frisians live? See, this is the municipality I'm talking about, Seelterland. It has a population of 14,000, but I can't find in which towns East Frisian is spoken. It must be in the north because that makes the most logical sense to me, but I don't know. Why don't they say the towns in which the language is spoken? Is it even spoken at all? If I had to draw East Frisian on a map, I would draw it like this right here, because that covers the whole municipality of Seelterland. Pretty much every map does that, but there are barely inhabited areas like the forest or the small farmland plots on the edges, and even then what you're left with are a bunch of towns that still have a population 5 times larger than the total amount of East Frisian speakers. So, I did some slight digging and found that the Wikipedia page of the municipality actually has more info on it if you look at it in Seelterfriesk. I got someone who understands Frisian more than me to translate this column of text specifically. So, these numbers came from a study in 1995 where around 10% of the population of the municipality filled in a survey about East Frisian. It states that around 4,000 people understood Seeltersk, which was nearly 50% of the population back then, but only slightly over 2,000 people spoke it. Although keep in mind that only 10% of the population was asked, so these numbers are extrapolated to the whole population of the municipality. Only a few specific towns were provided with percentages on how many people spoke Seeltersk in them, which will be useful for the map. The towns that are included are Romels, which is a pretty nice Wikipedia page. You also have Skaddel, Sedelsberg and Sterkelje. That church looks cool. I'd want to visit there. I got a baguette. And, yeah. Anyways, 40% of the citizens of Romels spoke Seeltersk. Skaddel and Sterkelje had around 27% of the population, and Sedelsberg had almost 10%. There are probably still some Seeltersk speakers in the countryside as well as in some of the other towns. For example, the town of Nijskaddel, outside of Seelterland, had over 50 East Frisians back in the 90s, but even if I went there today, I wouldn't be able to figure out if they're still there. But by using these numbers from 1995, I've tried to make on a map what I think the current situation might look like for Seelterfriesk in the current times. That's small, right? Hell, zoom out for a second. That is a very small language. Actually, let's show Saterland Frisian on the map of Europe for a moment. Oh, wow. The size of the language is a bit funny in the grand scheme of things, but I feel like it's also appropriate to mention that this language is very much in danger of going extinct. I read a paper from a few years back where one of the conclusions was that children keep speaking and learning the language in an increasingly decreasing way, which is definitely a worrying sign for the future of Seelterfriesk, but nothing that signifies a guaranteed extinction as far as I'm concerned. Livonian is over 100 times smaller, and you know how I feel about its chances of survival, so I wouldn't worry too much yet about East Frisian. One thing that also confused me for a while was how East Frisian even survived while being pretty much surrounded by German for centuries. And turns out, according to the Mercator Research Wiki on minority language learning, try to say that 5 times in a row, it's not that difficult, but according to them, it's because Seelterland had been isolated up until the 19th century due to it being surrounded by boggy moorland that could only be reached via boat or during a dry spell, which helped the East Frisian language survive there. Which probably explains why all other East Frisian dialects went extinct. They should have had moorland. Seeltersk had the geographic luck to survive, but obviously another part of surviving depends on whether you can teach the language to future generations. For learning the language, the municipality of Seelterland published an app called Kleine Saterfriesen for young children, so they can learn some basic East Frisian words. It has over 500 downloads, which is large for a language with less than 2,000 speakers. However, for the grown-ups among us, there's also 200-page PDF document to learn East Frisian from German, but you can just translate the German to English, so you don't need to worry about that. Actually, there are also some schools in which East Frisian is taught. Apparently, I'm just going to trust their website on that. And if you take a look at the Mercator website on East Frisian, which will be included in the description, and scroll all the way down, you can find a lot of online learning material and educational opportunities if you ever feel inclined to check out what Siltersk has to offer. But in case you prefer to get a general overview, I want to show you some comparisons between East Frisian and other languages. Now, in the previous video, people were a bit disappointed by the fact I only compared Livonian to Latvian and English. So, in an attempt not to make that mistake again, I've decided to expand the roster a little. Well, I'm not gonna be cruel, so how about this? And while that animation plays, I want to talk about a horrifically expensive way to help preserve smaller languages like East Frisian. Something I like the idea of is to make more linguistic adaptations of media for minority languages. For example, the show Avatar: The Last Airbender is really good and I love the Dutch version of it. And I know that the reason small languages don't get a dubbed version for themselves is because there isn't any financial gain to it. Rewriting an entire show, finding voice actors and studios to record the script, and then editing all of the new voice lines and slightly changing the editing where needed, it sucks up so much time, and honestly, for a language of less than 20,000 speakers, where over half of them will likely never even see the show, it doesn't really give a proper reason to invest all those resources into it. But paradoxically, the more endangered the language is, the more they would probably benefit from having more linguistic media in order to make teaching it easier and create more reasons for people to retain the language. Sadly, for languages like Livonian, this would be impossible. You wouldn't even be able to get enough speakers to do the voice acting for such a show. Maybe a single host YouTube channel would be more viable for that. And probably also more cost effective. East Frisian and North Frisian have the potential for dubbing such a show, but it would be difficult. But I believe that for West Frisian, the largest of the Frisian languages, it would actually be very achievable if the proper effort and investments are made. Actually, let's talk about West Frisian for a bit. West Frisian, more commonly referred to as just Frisian, is the largest Frisian language with the amount of native speakers being estimated far over 300,000. Because of that, West Frisian can enjoy a more luxurious existence than the 2,000 speakers of Saterland Frisian or the 10,000 of North Frisian, which I will get to in a minute. Hence, the reason people usually just call West Frisian Frisian, which is what I will not be doing for this part. But let me dampen this enthusiasm with one quick tidbit of information. The estimation of West Frisian speakers ranges between 300,000 and 450,000 from what I've seen. The population of the province of Friesland is 650,000. If the lower estimates of West Frisian were to be correct, then the West Frisian language would be a minority language in the province named after its people. It would be a large minority, around 45%, but that's at the lowest estimate. The highest estimate I've seen is 450,000. Which is a clear majority, but it wasn't always like this. 300 years ago, Friesland had a population of 130,000, and this actually tells us a lot about the Frisian ability to spread its language. East Frisian didn't grow that much throughout the baby boom, but if we assume that all those 130,000 people in Friesland in the 1700s were native West Frisian speakers, then that means that the total amount of West Frisian speakers has grown over 3 times larger in the last 300 years. This won't continue, obviously. Friesland is reaching a point where with an aging population and shrinking birth rates, we're on the cusp of seeing the population shrink, which in my non-expert opinion I can imagine resulting in the population declining by 50 to 100,000 people in the next 40 years. This population shrink is actually a very wide issue in much of the developed and the developing world, and there is even actually a great way to determine how much a country will grow or shrink in population. The total fertility rate in a country should be an average of 2.1 births per woman in order for the population to increase. Because it takes 2 children to replace 2 parents, and the extra 0.1 child is to take account of people dying before being able to reproduce, or people not being fertile. So, any country with less than 2.1 births per woman should have its population shrink after a couple of generations. The closer to 0, the worse it gets. The lowest fertility rate currently hovers around 1, which is South Korea. Which is bad. Their population will likely shrink by around 10% before 2050. Compare that to Nigeria, for example, who has a current population of around 225 million and a total fertility rate of around 5. Now, according to Worldometer, Nigeria is projected to reach a population of 350 million by the year 2045, which is more than the United States of America currently has, which is a little over 335 million. Nigeria is even projected to surpass the United States in population by the year of 2050, which is less than 26 years from now. I know, time is terrifying. We are almost closer to 2050 than 2000. Oh my god. What am I even doing? Oh, right, Frisian. I couldn't easily find the fertility rate of the province of Friesland, but the Netherlands as a whole has 1.6, and I don't think it varies too significantly between provinces. Another interesting thing is that West Frisian is large enough to have multiple different dialects that subdivide the language, which isn't the case with another Frisian language that I have talked about. I feel like you can say a lot about these different dialects of West Frisian, but I want to look at perhaps the most odd one of them all, Hilpersk. It's the smallest dialect of West Frisian, contained entirely within the towns of Hilpen and Molkwerum, and even in those towns it's spoken by about a third of the population. I went there and made all these nice recordings because I wanted to check the place out, but there is something about Hilpersk and West Frisian as a whole that is bothering me, and I really want to talk about it. And in case something is bothering you, yes, I have a cold, I'm sorry. I went through much of the outer shell of Friesland, visiting several handful of towns, including Hilpen, over the course of a few days, and, well, I barely saw anything in Frisian. Many towns there are heavily based around tourism. It is a massive industry. I mean, I saw signs in German, a lot of signs in Dutch, and a whole lot of English. But while there was a little Frisian here and there, it was really surprising just how little of it there was. I hope that I just missed the big Frisian places, because if what I saw is how it is everywhere, then I am a lot more concerned about the state of West Frisian. Pretty much all West Frisians are bi or trilingual, by the way. Frisian, Dutch, and English. I wanted to do an interview with a native Frisian speaker, but everywhere I went, everyone spoke fluent Dutch, and I was too afraid to ask whether they spoke Frisian as well. So, sadly, I didn't get any proper interviews, which is a bit of a shame. Something quite positive I can say about the province of Friesland, however, is how insanely beautiful it can be. I know these towns are aimed at tourism, but they definitely deserve to be visited. They are genuinely beautiful. Talking about beautiful, have you ever seen the flag of Friesland? I mean, just look at this. It's a unique, nicely colored design, very recognizable, and the symbolism fits. I genuinely think that the flag of Friesland is incredibly well designed, and probably among the best flag designs I've ever seen. Aside from flags, another very identifying trait of West Frisian for the outside world is one specific Frisian song that went viral among the Low Countries quite some time ago. The song is called Werbisto with over 3 million views, and a Frisian song getting that many views is extremely impressive. I am willing to bet that if you ask a random Fleming about their knowledge of Frisian, they will mention either the flag or, more likely, that they heard about a Frisian song long ago that takes place on a beach. And it's a good song. However, the lyrics can be quite difficult to understand. So it's a good thing that West Frisian is available on Google Translate. You can actually translate the lyrics. This is the first language I've talked about that has that utility. And I know, that segue was incredibly smooth. I like writing scripts. It's nice. But now we have to take our attention elsewhere. Because there's one thing of West Frisian that isn't West Frisian. Bilts. Bilts is a unique place. It's officially considered as a dialect of the Dutch language, but has a very large amount of Frisian influence that has made many people consider it as a different language altogether. So when Bilts applied to gain minority language protection, they were declined on the grounds that they weren't considered a language. Ouch! Due to this fact, you kind of have to consider this piece of coastline that is fully surrounded by Frisian on land as Dutch. But I will make a promise here. If Bilts ever gets officially recognized as a minority language and not as a dialect of Dutch or Frisian, I will make a full hour-long special video about Bilts. But I doubt that they will be given that recognition anytime soon. Maybe they could call themselves South Frisian and complete the compass. Speaking of completing the compass, we're heading north. North Frisian is the northernmost Frisian language. Wait, really? Well, you see, North Frisian is a difficult story. In the family of Frisian, it could be considered the less loved middle child that suffers an identity crisis. While West Frisian gets all the opportunities and East Frisian all the attention, North Frisian struggles with keeping its own name. Literally. There is no united native name for North Frisian in the North Frisian dialects. Every dialect differs massively, and this actually becomes something incredibly fascinating. While West and East Frisian feel more like single entities with slight variations in between dialects, where East Frisian just so happens to only have one surviving dialect, but there used to be more, North Frisian feels more like a loose confederation of different languages wearing the same name. So I want to talk about some of those dialects specifically and the differences between them. Let's start with the most geographically unique, Hollander. Hollander is a dialect of North Frisian based entirely on the small islands of Heligoland located here. It is spoken by about a third of the population, 500 people, and is taught in schools. Hollander is definitely threatened with extinction, but there are efforts to reverse the decline by creating a German to Hollander dictionary, putting more focus on teaching it to children in school, amongst some other less significant things as well. Hollander enjoys from the fact that they are located on an island where it is less difficult for language to survive. And in case you're curious on what the town looks like, there are some street fairs that you can check out, like this one. The other island dialects are Omerang, Solring and Vering. Combined with Hollander, these four dialects form the insular dialect group of North Frisian. Omerang is spoken by less than 800 people, which is a third of the total population of the island. Solring has less than 500 speakers and Vering has the most, with 3,000 speakers, from which half are native. Vering is also amongst the only places in the North Frisian district where the language sees actual public use. All other dialects suffer from being drowned out by German to the point where their language can only be spoken amongst family, friends and taught in school. But Vering has enough speakers where you could theoretically go about your day-to-day life without needing to use a different language. This means that Vering is probably the most stable North Frisian dialect. Omerang and Solring are not doing good though. Even though they are located on islands, tourism has drowned out the Frisians living there and is probably going to be the lead cause of extinction for both these dialects if more effort of language preservation doesn't get made. Plus the fact that Solring is connected to the mainland via road mostly diminishes the island isolation benefit that the dialect would be expected to have. This is also the case with the next dialect, Hallifreysk. Hallifreysk is not considered to be part of the insular group the previous four dialects have been in, instead being classified as a mainland dialect. There were 40 speakers of the dialect in 1972, which is likely far smaller now. The island chain as a whole has a population of 300, with houses being cramped together in safe areas because the land there isn't protected from flooding and other natural events, requiring the islands to be evacuated during storms. Hallifreysk does not have much documentation either, sadly enough. There are no curriculums, not much literature, and not even a building for the local dialect and culture. East Frisian has one of those, and it greatly helps cementing their history to the area. The building looks so nice as well. I would want to visit there. I ate a baguette. The other mainland dialects are not doing much better. Take Suðurgjóshyrar, for example, which has a grand total of 0 speakers. It is extinct. Why is it even on the map? But luckily for you, Maðalgjóshyrar is still going strong with a handful of speakers. Why does it cover an area of several thousand people then? But no worries, because Norðurgjóshyrar has around 100 speakers left, which compared to the others is quite substantial. The map looks a lot sadder now, but don't worry, it gets worse. Kerhirðar likely has less than 100 speakers left, and a fun fact about Kerhirðar is that it's experiencing a dwindling number of native speakers and has no formal schooling offered to educate younger speakers, cementing its likelihood of extinction. That was not a very fun fact. Anyways, next up is Víringhirðarfreysk, which is estimated to have a couple hundred speakers left, and this is the first mainland North Frisian dialect that I feel positive about for the chances of its survival. It's a nice change of pace, right? A mainland dialect that will almost certainly outlive me. But that's not the only one, because I saved the best for last, so that it doesn't have to be too depressing. Mooring. With around 1,000 speakers, it has the status of being the go-to mainland North Frisian dialect for communication between North Frisians. It is the second largest dialect of North Frisian and will probably carry part of the North Frisian legacy going into the future. It also gets taught in a primary school in Risum Lindholm. When you take a step back and look at North Frisian as a whole, you might realize that over half of all North Frisian dialects are in real danger of starving out during our lifetimes. This can be attributed to a lot of things. Tourism, the rise of the internet and global communication, the passage of time, little public attention to language preservation, not enough funding, you name it. But maybe this video can help inform you that the Frisian languages would benefit a lot from increased public attention and funding for language preservation. I would like to see North and East Frisian survive and have West Frisian stabilize. But something like that takes a lot of effort and can only happen if everyone wants to help with it. And now the video is approaching its end, but while this video stops here, the Frisian languages will continue for long after it is uploaded. And there is still a lot of Frisian for you to learn about. I hope I've earned your subscription today. I hope you enjoyed, because these are the Frisian languages, which are some of the languages I like. Have a good day.